Before we talk about the communists of China, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the socialists in America. So, for the past 3 elections, we've released a report where we analyze the candidates running for office that have explicit endorsements from various socialist groups like the Democratic Socialists of America. And we see how they fared in their elections. We call this report Socialist Watch, and we just recently released Socialist Watch 2022. So, Justin, as the originator of this report, why don't you take us through like the intentions of this report, what you're kind of going for when you first created this thing?
Yeah, so we started doing this back in, I want to say 2018 was the first time that we did it. So this would be the third election that we've done this. And the idea was, 2018 was in AOC time period, right? And socialism was becoming really politically popular, not just something that was growing amongst students and, young people and stuff like that. But they were
Losers.
actually, yeah, obviously. But it was becoming more popular with politicians who are actually identifying and marketing themselves as socialists. Really, for the first time, we started seeing this on a wide scale, other than with Bernie Sanders and people like that. So what we wanted to do was figure out, okay, how successful are these candidates, and what does this tell us about the political landscape in America? And so we started tracking socialist candidates beginning in 2018 with the 2018 election. And we've done it every election since. So every 2 years we've done it. And what we found in the initial election compared to this one, which is kind of interesting, is that socialist candidates in that 2018 election were not very successful. I believe it was only like 39 or 40%. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Won their races. But in 2020, we saw a completely different, we saw a turnaround for their fortunes, all right? Basically, we went from having about a 35 to 40% success rate for socialist candidates to having a 90% success rate for socialist candidates in 2020 election. And then when we just did it in the most recent 22, we found the same thing, 91% success rate for candidates. So we tracked it. This isn't just congressional races. We did track congressional races, but we also tracked state legislative races and some statewide races as well. Most of the socialist candidates are still running for state legislative seats, so that's where you're going to see most of it. But in the report, which I'm sure will be linked in the show notes, people will be able to actually go in and see all of the candidates that we tracked, all the different races. They can see if there were any socialist candidates in their state. Our list had 132 elections, I think in 26 states. And the way we chose socialists, so how do we know that someone is a socialist and not just a liberal or something? The way we did it was based on endorsements that they received from big socialist groups. So if the Democratic Socialists of America are endorsing you, then we track you as a socialist. Our Revolution was another group. That's the group that formed out of the Bernie Sanders failed presidential campaign. That's another group. If they endorse you, then we count you as a socialist. We also, take a look at what we do sort of a sampling of what various candidates believe, and to make sure that this is all lining up, and it does. If you support single payer healthcare, Green New Deal, things like that, we classified you as a socialist. So 90-something% success rate, really incredible and obviously disturbing. But we've got theories as to why that is. I don't know if Chris wants to jump in on that, or if you want to talk about that, Donnie. But
let's go to Chris, because I'm kind of curious about what your takeaway is from this. I mean, you could see the results. All of the little green one obviously signifies that they won the election. You see very little red lost markers on this little chart that we're showing here, and yeah, north of 90%. So, Chris, what do these results say to you?
So first of all, I think, two things really stood out to me. First of all, most of these socialist candidates seem to run in very certain parts of the country, mostly in California and the Northeast coast. A lot from Connecticut, a lot from Vermont, a lot from those northeastern states. So I think this is not representative of the entire country at all. But another thing that I thought really stood out to me was the Democratic Party in general seems to be moving much more to the left, because a lot of these candidates have overtaken more centrist Democratic candidates, but we do not have the same thing happening on the right. And what I mean by that is we do not have ultra conservative candidates who are calling for major entitlement reforms and going back to an originalist court and stuff like that. So it seems like the trajectory of the Democratic Party seems to be going extremely leftward. And like Justin said, a lot of these races occurred at the statewide level, which means that in the years to come, many of those candidates will then move on to federal offices in one form or the other. So I think this is really building a foundation within the Democratic Party that the very far left progressive socialist wing of the party is really taking over the party, and we do not have the same thing happening in the Republican Party. So I think this is really just a one-dimensional aspect of the Democratic Party really moving leftward, and this is probably going to have repercussions for elections to come for many, many years.
Yeah, I forget where I heard it, but I heard that somebody referring to this is the socialists basically trying to create a robust bullpen where they start with like these lower races, and they get their preferred candidates in these lower races, so that eventually they can move up the political ladder and start taking up more national level offices or something like that, and maybe striving to be the next Ocasio-Cortez or something like that. So, Jim, what do you think when you're looking at all these different results? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same thing that Chris had just articulated, and it's that the Democratic Party is much farther to the left, and the Republican Party is to the right. I mean, if Bill Clinton, if his agenda from 1992 was ever presented to the Democrat voters today as a presidential candidate, he'd have performed worse than Kamala Harris did, and she didn't even get to Iowa. I mean,
it's borderline MAGA.
Yeah. And yeah, as you said, if you look, as Andy's scrolling through it here on the screen, you can see how many of these socialists and socialist endorsed candidates have been successful in state legislatures. And as pointed out earlier, that's kind of the AAA before you get to the big leagues of being in the House of Representatives or a United States senator. I mean, just look at, Bernie Sanders is a senator. He's, the senior senator from Vermont, I think now, because Leahy is retiring. And he's run for president, twice, going to be 3 times. He's beloved by his party. He's a very powerful person who has to be dealt with one way or another, whether he gets a nomination or not. The Democrat Party is now a very much hard left party. And the Republicans, I mean, look, who's in leadership in the Republican House right now? They're squishes. They're not. Mitch McConnell is not interested in pushing forward a conservative agenda. He's not interested in reducing the size of government. And we have to remember, love him or hate him, Donald Trump in his first year, he barely got any cooperation from his own party in Congress, even when they had control of the entire. They had more control over Congress than the Democrats did for the first year of Biden. And the Democrats always fall in line, bend over backwards, and do whatever it takes to advance the leftist agenda. They will even lose future elections for it. And why do they do that? Because they are a hard left party, and they get rewarded for it because they get their agenda passed. So the Republicans, they're not dedicated enough to fight against this sort of thing. And I think one thing, when you go to heartland.org and you can download this report for yourself, I don't know if we did this analysis in there, but you could actually do the math yourself. It'd be really interesting to see by percentage of elected officials, which state legislature is the most socialist. I would guess it would probably be Massachusetts or New York or California, but you're going to see that some of these blue states are not just blue, but they're actually communist red.
Yeah, no doubt. You compare this to AAA ball, and I think the results are going to inevitably lead me to AA. The crickets enjoyed that one.
Yeah, stick to finger guns.
Justin, I think my takeaway from this was that I think that this is a result. This is an effect of red areas in the country getting more red. We talked about this before, and blue areas of the country getting more blue. And these deeper blue areas is what is allowing candidates like this to be able to be electable. This is not some result of moderation at all. It's the complete opposite of that. And I think that as we continue this trend and we see these red areas getting more red and these blue areas getting more red, we're going to see more success of these socialist endorsed candidates. What do you have to say about any of these comments so far?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I think Jim is right that I think Jim and Chris are right that really the main takeaway from this, or the most important takeaway from this whole report, is that the popularity of socialism within the Democratic Party has increasingly become more reflected in the candidates politically. And I think there was a time when there was the base in the party was really hardcore left, but the politicians were not necessarily as left as the base was. And now the base is moving more to the left. The politicians are moving more to the left. And the way that that's occurring is, and it's reflected in this report, is socialist, more activist part of the party is targeting seats where they know all they have to do is win the primary and they automatically win the election, general election. And so they're targeting those seats and winning the primaries because they've got the more active base, and then they automatically win the general election. And that's why you're seeing a 90-something% success rate. It's not because America loves socialism. The polls that we've done actually show America isn't really too happy with socialist ideas. The truth is that deep blue seats, though, are willing to adopt socialism. And so the Democratic Party is becoming increasingly more radicalized. And yes, Bernie Sanders even though Bernie Sanders is actually technically not a Democrat, he's an independent. He, almost became the Democrat Party's presidential nominee twice, despite that. And so, and you could argue if they hadn't changed the rules, he probably would have been the candidate's party, or the party's candidate. So really, I think fundamentally, what this shows is it's proof that that socialists are becoming politically more attuned. They're becoming smarter. They're learning about how to get candidates into office.
Not about economics or anything, about politics.
No,
right?
Politically, they're becoming savvier. And as a result of that, they are getting the party and legislatures and Congress, because there were 50-something Congress people who are in this analysis as well, who the vast majority of them won their races. So, I mean, Congress is becoming more socialistic. State legislatures are becoming more socialistic. And the Democratic Party as a whole is becoming more socialistic. And I would say that that's probably somewhat aligned with what's going on the right, too, because I do think that the Republican Party has become more conservative over time as well. Not radically so. It's not like you have, libertarian anarchists that are winning seats. You don't have that. But you do have more conservatives in the Republican Party holding office than you had in 2000 or something.
Let's do a libertarian watch too and see what the success rate of all the libertarian endorsed candidates are.
What's really interesting about that is that libertarians really are the sort of anti-socialist, right? So if you were going to do a comparison, left-right comparison, you should look at libertarians. But libertarians as a group politically have taken the total opposite approach of what socialists have done. And instead of trying to win seats within the Republican Party, they've kept themselves out of the Republican Party and just ran against them and tried to be spoilers. And that is the opposite of what socialists are doing, where they're actually going into these deep blue state seats and they're saying, we're going to be the Democrat Party nominee in this place and win the race. That's not what libertarians are doing. Libertarians are saying, you know what? I don't even want to be part of the Republican Party. I'm just going to get 5% of the vote and spoil things for people. That's basically what they've done. So it's a really strange thing. They're both in the similar situations, but they've taken completely different political paths. And as a result of it, libertarians are not politically as powerful as socialists have become. And I think that really tells you something.
Yeah, no, no, go ahead, Chris. I want to give you kind of last words on this before we move on to our main topic.
Yeah, I also think this is an indictment of the media, the academia, Hollywood, and all these other super powerful institutions that have become pro-socialism. And 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, the media, academia, Hollywood, they were not pro-socialist, but today they are. And one of the things that really stood out to me was in the 2022 midterm election, we had a humongous turnout among young voters. Young voters usually do not turn out for midterm elections, but they did this time. And guess what? They voted overwhelmingly for these socialist candidates. So to me, this is, not a good harbinger of things to come. If we are teaching an entire generation that socialism is good and that socialism in the United States is going to be a great thing as long as, they keep electing socialists who are going to implement their agenda.
Just two quick things.
Jim wants the last word. Go ahead. It's
two quick things, and it includes a segue. One, Justin, you could write the Libertarian Watch 2022 report on a cocktail napkin. You wouldn't even need Donnie to even lay it out. And two, being, as Chris just pointed out, being a socialist used to be a dangerous thing. You had no political career if somebody called you a socialist. Back in the Cold War, as the old man on this podcast, we had the Soviet Union out there. We had a commie enemy that we were all united against defeating in the Cold War. We have one of those now in China, which is a communist country, but the academia has taught an entire generation or two to embrace socialism. And that's why, as we're going to see in some clips today, we have some of the leading leaders in the world, in government and in these NGOs and other powerful positions, not just making excuses for China, but actively showing admiration for the for their brutality and their crushing of freedom. And we have two generations in America that pretty much think the same thing.